There were more attacks overnight. The Russian invasion of Ukraine continues. On Friday, Russian President Vladimir Putin met with African leaders in St. Petersburg who urged Russia for a peaceful solution to their war, as well as a deal to resume grain from Ukraine to other countries. In Niger, West Africa, France and the EU have stopped financial support after a military coup toppled the democratically elected president. For more on everything that's been going on with these global affairs in the last couple of days, we want to welcome back Michael O'Hanlon. He's the senior foreign affairs expert at Brookings and the author of The Military History for the Modern Strategist, a book I am proud to have on my bookshelf down there at Fitzgerald News headquarters down in the basement of my house. Michael O'Hanlon, great to see you again. Putin's been out more the last couple of days. Obviously, there's a story about the drone attacks that had happened, but you know, we are still trying to make sense of what happened a couple of weeks ago when this Wagner force started making this move towards Russia. What position is he in right now?
I'm afraid Tommy's in a pretty strong position domestically. You know, I think if there was going to be a revolt, it was this revolt, the Prigozhin-Wagner group, and it's over. And Putin seems to have maneuvered his way out. I don't know if he appealed to Prigozhin's sense of loyalty or patriotism or threatened him or a little of both. I have no doubt it felt a little bit like The Godfather in some of the conversations. But I think that if Putin can face down that threat and continue to inform the Russian people or misinform them about what's going on here, I think he'll stay safely in the Kremlin.
But, you know, to continue your analogy there, in The Godfather, we knew why it ended with the Tattaglias and the Corleones. Yeah. We still don't really have a clear story on how this came to a resolution and why, even though it was building for a while before it actually happened to people who were following the story, it seemed to vanish as soon as it began.
Well, the vanishing part, I think, was part of the condition that Putin imposed and basically said to Prigozhin, you can go quietly by sealing your mouth or I can seal it for you. Yeah. And so again, some pretty hard-knuckle politics, I'm guessing. In terms of the buildup, we do know that Prigozhin was extremely frustrated by the way the war went this winter and spring, where his men, some of them prison convicts, but otherwise still in his employ, were getting thrown into machine gun positions of the Ukrainian armed forces, trying to take back that town of Bakhmut, which was what we talked about all winter and early spring. And they may have lost actually more than 10,000 people killed in that fight alone, or at least in the thousands. So the combination of that frustration, the belief the Russian military wasn't helping his men enough, and then his overconfidence based on his relationship with Putin in the sense maybe he could somehow just do this crazy thing and Putin would ride to his rescue and get rid of the bums at the Ministry of Defense. That seems to have been the way Prigozhin thought about it. Not very rational.
So at the same time that all of this is going on with Russia and Putin, he hosts this, you know, conference for these West African countries at the same time while he is invading another country on his border. What is his end game here? Is he trying now to kind of, you know, rechristen himself as a world leader of other nations, a nation builder? What is that about? Or does he have any kind of vested interest in the African continent itself?
Well, he certainly likes to have influence in a few key places, and the same Wagner group is in Africa extracting resources and probably giving some of it to the Kremlin, some of the money. But I think on top of that, Putin has played the developing world pretty well. And he's less unpopular there than he should be. And they, you know, many developing countries see us as not having helped them enough with COVID, whether it's in terms of vaccines or financial relief. More generally, of course, the legacy of colonialism is still there. So Putin can monkey around with that kind of a political environment and keep them guessing, keep the developing countries guessing as to which side they really most want to be on. On the grain, however, there is no doubt that they suffer the most if Putin shuts down grain exports. And so there may be some leverage there, at least to resume those shipments.
The grain exports are a big concern. What we've seen happen in Niger over the last 24 hours is concerning on a couple of levels, because while the U.S. government hasn't quite called this a coup as of yet, there's certainly been a regime change here, and this is a country, as impoverished as it is, does have uranium mining in it. How worried should we be about that?
Well, it also has 1,000 U.S. troops, or in that ballpark, helping with the fight on terror. So when you think about the different stakes, uranium is one piece, ISIS is another. You should be worried, partly because there's now this zone or swath of coups through the Sahel region of Africa. There have been about a half dozen in the last few years. And when you put all that together, it throws Africa backward at a time when Africa needs to go forward.
Thumbtack this for people who might not follow us as closely. Are these good guys that are falling from power?
This guy was not that bad in Niger. Some of the others, you know, like in Sudan, you could debate whether this person really had any right to stay in power, and you didn't really like to see a military take the question into its own hands, but you didn't have any sympathy for the previous leader. I'm not saying the president of Niger was a great leader, but he was elected democratically. He was trying to work with us, as evidenced by this ongoing base. This was a bad idea, this coup.
The Secretary of State Anthony Blinken says some of the aid now going to that country might be in question. How will they make that determination?
First thing is decide, what was it a coup? And I think the answer is pretty clear. But second, do they then invoke a national security waiver to keep the aid flowing because of dire and, you know, high-level American interests? They could then, in theory, still give the aid even after the coup. I'm not sure they will, though. I think they want to send a pretty clear message here that this is unacceptable.
Michael O'Hanlon, I think you literally just took us around the globe in just a couple of minutes. We appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Michael